On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience number 2496 with guest Julia Mossbridge. The No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. This is a show where two podcasters with 204 hours of Joe Rogan experience get to know Joe Rogan. It's a show for anyone who's curious about Joe Rogan, his guests and their claims, and anyone who just wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence and ever weirder media influence, I would argue.
Yeah.
I'm Michael Marshall. I'm joined as ever by Cecil Cicirello. Today, we're going to be covering Joe's May 2026 interview with Julia Mossbridge. So, Cecil, how did Joe introduce Julia in the show notes?
Reads, Julia Mossbridge, PhD, is a cognitive neuroscientist, author, and educator. She is the founder and president of American Electrodynamics, the co-founder and chief science officer of Applied Love Labs, and senior advisor for American Deep Tech. Her latest book, Have a Nice Disclosure, is available now.
Okay. And is there anything else we should know about Julia?
Well, she is an academic. She got a BA from Oberlin. She has an MA in neuroscience from UC San Francisco. And she's got a PhD from Northwestern University in psychoacoustics from the Communications and Disorders Department. In her own words, she focuses ruthlessly on developing a deep understanding of love, time, technology, and how these human experiences relate to corresponding physical forces. She has several mobile apps that she's helped develop or been part of. One app is called Time Machine. Naming it after Apple's memory backup system makes it hard to search for. This is sort of an affirmation, audio journaling, meditation app. She also has an app called the Gaze app. So you look into a camera on your phone and it can either connect you with a person in the lobby there, and there wasn't any when I went and I downloaded the app, or you can just stare into your own eyes, or if you happen to have somebody there, you can stare into the eyes of a random person. All the rest, it's so strange. All the rest of your face is blurred except for your eyes. But I was wearing glasses, so it was a little more of my face. It kind of got a little more of it. And it's very, very strange. But evidently, here's what the website says about the Gaze app. The app introduces a pre-symbolic, wordless intervention grounded in research and empathy and social connection. Mounting evidence suggests that mutual eye gazing can increase empathy by activating mirror neuron systems and stimulating oxytocin, supporting pre-social behavior. So I don't know. That sounds like something Joe would laugh at if Elon took their government grant away. I found her CV from 2025 online, and she was a visiting scholar, adjunct faculty, and research associate at the Department of Psychology at Northwestern University. But it appears that she's moved on from that job. In 2018, she was the lead robot psychologist for Sophia, a humanoid robot. There's a wiki article about Sophia. I don't know if I'm sure everybody's seen this image, which is kind of like a robot with half a face and then a bunch of machinery in the back, and it sort of talks to people. It's like a whole thing.
Yeah, it's satirized in an episode of Silicon Valley. They have their own kind of AI version of it,
Yeah, and since 2019, it appears her full-time gig is the executive director for the Institute of Love and Time, or TILT, which now had just changed their name to Applied Love Labs. And it's, according to their website, a team of scientists and builders who are addressing the gap between how people perceive unconditional love and its transformative potential. She's also the founder and research director of the Mossbridge Institute, where they train people to work with innovative and emerging technologies and ideas, perform research, and create technology related to transformational discoveries. She's also an author, and she's on Joe's show to promote her book called Have a Nice Disclosure, which has an alien on the cover, but is a total rug pull because the book isn't about aliens at all.
Yeah, it's not at all. It's great. And actually part of the reason I was so keen for us to do this episode on Julia is that this isn't actually the first time that I ever came across Julia Mossbridge's work.
Oh.
So I've mentioned I'm the editor of the Skeptic magazine here in the UK. And actually at the back end of last year, we published, and the very start of this year, in fact, we published this 3-part investigation into an experiment that was conducted, which claimed to show that someone who was lucid dreaming was able to predict the future. And the author of that experiment was one Julia Mossbridge. And she actually had a co-author in Professor Chris French, who's a psychologist and former editor of the Skeptic magazine, longtime skeptic here in the UK. Now, it seemed in this experiment like there was a small but statistically significant effect in favor of precognitive dreams. And this was something that was kind of baffling to the skeptics involved until Chris French realized that once you take another look at the statistics as to how they're figuring out what's significant or not, there was an error in the calculations because they weren't calculating for the fact that you were having multiple different attempts. And so it's more likely that you would get something right just by chance. And once they corrected that error, the significance entirely disappeared. But Julia didn't accept the conclusion of that reanalysis of the work and said there's still some stuff in there that's too hard to explain. So this is still proof that precognitive dreams are real. And I'll link to all 3 of those articles in the 3-part investigation in the show notes here.
It's interesting that that's what happened there because I think we'll be doing something very similar for our Toolbox section.
I think we might well do that. Absolutely, yeah. So what did they talk about in this interview with Joe?
I talked about unconditional love, intuition, the telepathy tapes, how most academics are big meanies and they're know-it-alls, and how listening is feminine, but Joe disagrees because he doesn't want to be thought of as having feminine traits.
Yeah, and also because he's not really listening as well.
Bravo.
We will come to that. So before we get to the main event, which is going to be all about telepathy and whether Psi-Phenomena are real, before we get to that, we want to say a big thanks to our Area 51 All Access Pass patrons. They are Ramtam Tickler, Megan Bray, Morgan Gordon, Billionaire Oligarchs, Lucy Cortez, Left Hand Voodoo, Scott Laird, Stargazer 97, Stoned Banana, Laura Williams, no, not that one, the other one. Matthew Cutler, autistic Twitch streamer. Darlene, Angie Matke, Cindy Lynch, yes, that's Cindy Lynch. Carissa Gunderson, Chunky Cat in Chicago has the catnip ready. It's oregano. It's oregano. I'll do it properly that time. It's definitely oregano. Don't thank me, your show is just worth investment. Fred R. Gruthius, Dr. Andrew Gibson, online physics tutor, and help me, no Rogan Kenobi. You're my only, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm not going to read this if you can't be civil. They all subscribe to patreon.com/no Rogan. You can do that too. All patrons get early access to ad-free episodes. You'll also get a special patron-only bonus segment every single week. And this week, we'll check back in with the voices in Joe's head. Nice. And we will learn something about one of Joe's dogs that will make me think we're living in a simulation. You can check that out at patreon.com/no Rogan. But now it's time for our main event. It's time. A huge thank you to this week's veteran voice of the podcast. That was Gen announcing our main event. Remember that you too can be on the show. Just send us a recording of you giving us your best rendition of It's Time. You can send that to noroganpod@gmail.com. And remember, tell us how you want to be credited on the show.
I might make it through the rest of this season, but I'm running low, folks. Hit me up with your It's Times. Come on now, send them along.
Yeah.
All right, so this main event that we're going to be covering is mostly talking about the research and work that Julia Mossbridge does. There's about almost an hour worth of a feeling out, getting to know you period in the beginning. And we'll be covering some of that stuff in different sections on this show. But the main thrust of her work sort of gets brought up about 50 minutes into the show. And Joe asks very specifically about the experiments that she's conducted in the past.
There's a foundation called the Bial Foundation in Portugal. And I wrote an application to them and they funded my postdoc so I could study the sense of being stared at with like closed circuit TV monitors. And I could study how the skin physiology, skin conductance or sweat changes when just before you get a response right on a random like psychic task. And so that's kind of precognition or presentiment. And then I just I got really interested in presentiment because I saw that it was real. And I also saw there was a big gender difference that was fascinating to me, which is that before men got their first trial correct, and this is just a guessing game, so that, it's all randomly selected, their skin conductance would go crazy, like they just won the lottery. And before they didn't get it correct or they were incorrect, it would just kind of like peter along. So they were anticipating at a very high level what the future was going to bring, whether they were going to win or not. Whereas women practically, but not totally, showed the opposite. But their skin, but regardless of what happened, whether it was correct or incorrect, they were much lower than men. So men were really excited about the future correct thing. At least their physiology showed that.
So, okay, she's discovered that all men have a spidey sense, apparently.
I guess so, yeah.
And when they're not right, when it's not a spidey sense, it just peters along. I assume she meant Peter Parker's along, and that's how the spidey sense is working here.
Bravo. Well done.
So I suspect this is an example of something that we're going to talk about a lot in the Toolbox section, which is this kind of remembering the hits, ignoring the misses, cognitive biases types of things. When she says it was interesting that it worked in men and not women, it feels a lot like, to me, like subgroup analysis or data mining. You take a look at the entire picture, maybe you don't see anything particularly remarkable, but then you start breaking down the group into little chunks. What about people over the age of 30 compared to under 30? What about people who are left-handed versus right-handed?
Right.
What about men versus women? What about men under the age of 30 who are left-handed? Like, if you do that enough times, you might be able to break it into a chunk where you can find an effect. So is it a case that really men are more likely to be psychic in this experiment? Or is it just that the biases that were present in your study that caused noise in the data happen to show up more visibly in the data for men because noise is random, and that randomness is going to have a huge effect, especially if you're looking at very small effect sizes, very small sample sizes.
And that's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, where you look at the data and then you just move your target to where all the data hits. So you basically, it's like you're shooting the side of a barn, and wherever all the bullets are closely related, as close as they can be, you put your target over that to say, hey, look, I hit the target so many times. Look at how great I am. And that's essentially what the Texas sharpshooter fallacy is. So that's interesting. And it's very similar to sort of what we'll be talking about in the Toolbox. There's a, counting the hits, forgetting the misses sort of thing.
Yeah, it is that. Although this is almost like a modified version of the Texas sharpshooter, where everything is inside the circle, but it's more like a dartboard, and you can turn the dartboard round so that more of the bullets happen to be in the 20 rather than the 1, because you're controlling the segmentation within that circle.
Marsh's dartboard fallacy is what we're going to call it from now on. All right, so this next bit, this is a continuation. Joe is actually asking, why was there a difference between the two genders?
Do you have a theory as to why men have that response and women don't?
I kind of think it's cultural. You were talking about the importance of winning. And that we know that gambling addicts are twice as likely, or maybe 3 times as likely to be men as women.
Really?
Yeah. And the importance of winning, well, I don't know if it's biological or cultural, but in any case, the importance of being alpha or the importance of winning, I think it's a big deal. It's a big deal to men.
Do you think that goes back to tribal war?
I think it goes back to chimpanzees.
Yeah, which do tribal war.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense that the importance in winning is literally survival or death.
You will get kicked out of your little chimpanzee colony.
Not only that, the ability to predict things that are going to happen would probably keep you alive.
Yeah.
Like if you were running into an ambush, I don't like this, or something's wrong, something's off, or now's the time to go. Like I feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those combined. But, there's other tasks that aren't about winning, that are just about are you going to see a picture that's scary versus a picture that's neutral, where women and men both show the effect. But in this particular task, it was just very clear. And then I replicated it in heartbeat. So the first one was in skin conductance. And then I looked at heart rhythms. And I replicated that same thing where men are like, oh yeah, here we go. And women are like, da, 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 da. If something doesn't matter so much to you in the future, I don't think it matters so much to you in anticipating it.
Okay, so here we are explaining why it seems that men have the spidey sense greater than women. And we can put all of these hypotheses and explanations on it. But the thing is, if the data was just flawed because the experiment had flaws, all of this explaining why there's a difference is just a waste of everyone's time. The difference was randomness and noise and a poor methodology. And we will actually come into some of the methodology that we'll actually see from her experiments later in this to help us judge how tight that methodology might be stuck to. But even if we accepted for a moment that this experiment was totally legit, the data that it discovered was totally borne out, men are better predicting the future than women. And also men are more likely to get addicted to gambling than women. And apparently those two things are linked or they back each other up. Okay. Is that because the people who get addicted to gambling get so hooked on how easy it is to win the gamble because you can predict the future because of your psychic ability? So you're constantly winning. And is that why people end up being gambling addicts? Is that why casinos and gambling companies find it really hard to make a profit? And why they spend all of their time and all their marketing budget trying to actively dissuade men from partaking in their services and to only attract women? No, obviously not. The gambling industries heavily target men first, and it's not because men are so successful at winning lots of money with gambling. And I think in reality, like, men gamble more, partly because they had access to disposable income. They were the ones who controlled the finances. Right. And so they've been marketed to so heavily by the gambling industries. And okay, there might be another kind of secondary effect in there on like expectation of risk-taking. Men are more likely to be risk-taking than women. That might be biological on the effects of high testosterone, but it even more likely to be socialization. It's just what you're taught society expects of you for a long time. It's nothing to do with how psychic you are or how much investment you have in the future if you anticipate it mattering to you and therefore you'll benefit from it. This is post hoc rationalization for what I would argue is just sloppy methodology.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting part here too where they talk about war parties and chimps and how those are the things that intuition is so important. And she spends a lot of time in this episode talking about intuition and how it really is a factor and how it can sort of guide you through your life and how it genuinely, she thinks it can be measured. And really, if you think about a war party, a bunch of war parties, what about the ones that didn't feel the intuition and then they died? Like, we're not factoring in all those war parties that failed. Their intuition failed them because they were on the losing side. I'm sure there's plenty of people.
It's because they're all women. It's always the ones who lose are always women.
They were
That's
all the women.
problem.
That was the issue. Yeah. Look, I'm sure that there is people who get on planes and they have a panic attack. They think that they have a premonition of the plane going down, and then they get off the plane. They're let off the plane because the plane hasn't left yet. And then the plane just is fine. The plane just takes off and lands, and it's fine. We never hear about those, right? But but it really, I'm sure there's plenty of people who have premonitions of those types of things, and they never come true. We're not counting all of those things. We're just counting the one or two times that it becomes notable because it actually comes true, because it happens. Now, they veer off for a second to talk about psychedelics, and then they start talking about how they affect the brain.
Well, that's one of the weird things that they've demonstrated about certain psychedelics like psilocybin. You would think that it just like turns on your mind and all the synapses are firing. No.
Dampens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very weird.
Yeah. So
because it makes you think like, what are we doing with the mind?
Yeah.
Or the brain, I should say, not the mind.
Well, and the brain is related to the mind in ways we don't understand. And then it's sometimes not related to the mind, right? Like in the psilocybin results, you're having all these experiences, but the brain is dampened.
Yeah.
What's going on? And there's the filter theory of consciousness says, well, consciousness is kind of like out there, almost like a radio signal, and your brain's kind of filtering it.
Yes.
So that then you have this simple, like, oh, pick up the cup and say the words. And, you can kind of live your life without realizing that person over there is having this experience and that's going on. And then in the future, this will happen. So it makes sense to me that it's like our conscious minds, in order to just deal with daily life, have to be kind of stupid. And then...
Because otherwise you'd be overwhelmed by all the data and possibilities.
It's so much...
You're in the universe. And
it's so much data. It's
multicellular creatures all around you and subatomic particles. Like,
yeah. And when we're working with... I work with a whole team that works with non-speaking autistic kids, like in telepathy tapes. And when we're working with them, like they get distracted by that stuff. Like they'll say, I'm distracted. When I say, I mean, they're, typing on a letterboard or a keyboard. Mm-hmm. There's spirits in the room, or, I'm thinking about what you did earlier today that I didn't know about, but I do know about because I'm telepathic, And so it's like a lot of information that makes it pretty hard to be in the here and now.
So, yeah, she's talking here about like the psychedelic experience and saying that it's confusing that when you're on psychedelics, you'll have like weird experiences, even though it's when your brain is dampened. Now, I'm not an expert as to say whether it is dampened or not, but if it was that your brain is dampened and then you have this weird experience in psychedelics, I wouldn't say it's all that remarkable. Like, what if the bits of your brain that get dampened are the ones that anchor you to reality?
Right. Yeah.
Like, no wonder you start spiraling off into psychedelic experiences if those bits that inhibit your brain from spiraling that kind of way are gone. But what she's actually arguing for here, and you see this a lot with these types of psi kind of researchers, this idea that consciousness isn't emergent from the brain. It's not a thing that our brain does. There is consciousness out there, this big field of consciousness out in the ether, out in the collective mind, out in the universe somewhere. And our brains are merely tapping into that and like filtering, like channeling a little bit, like digging out a little channel and pointing it towards our brain. And a part of that consciousness flows into us. And that's the us-ofness that we consider experience. And that is how they would explain we're telepathic. What we're doing is we're just allowing someone else's consciousness in from the great, collective consciousness in the sky. Or they're tapping at the same bit. So she's saying that the existence of telepathy, which she thinks she can prove by experimentation, is support for that theory, that consciousness is elsewhere. But I would argue that a better explanation is that the experiments that prove that telepathy exists are just flawed in ways that we can't easily tell because we're not great at telling these types of things. It could be bias. It could be over extrapolation from small results. It could be poor controls, poor sample size, poor effect size, all these types of things. And if that was true, that telepathy is just emergent from poor methodology, how do we explain consciousness? Well, maybe consciousness is just what happens when you run electrical currents through neurons. The meat that is my brain is not connected in any way to the meat that is your brain. So if I want to transmit a thought to your brain, Cecil, I've got to use language and noises to do that because we aren't sharing a consciousness experience from the great beyond. And then she says about the autistic kids that she thinks proves this. And we're going to talk a lot about the telepathy tape. She's involved in some of the telepathy tapes experiments at the moment. When she says the autistic kids are getting distracted from the experiments by all the stuff around them and they're finding it really hard because they're so overwhelmed by what they're seeing, I'd argue they're not doing experiments. You're doing an experiment.
Right.
The kid isn't involved. They're just present. They didn't consent. Their attention was never with you in the first place.
Yeah.
The reason they're able to, seem telepathic is because they're talking to you and you already know the things about you that they're telling you.
I think this is a really cool idea, right? For like a fiction story or something, that there's like a stream, like a literal stream of consciousness that we all tap into and we can communicate via our brains or whatever. I think that's a cool fictional story and would be a cool sci-fi story if somebody wrote it. I think it would be fun to read. But I think what I'm seeing from a lot of the people that are involved with Joe, especially these research type people, right? He gets these PhDs on. They all seem to have this sort of real inherent bias in their work when they start, right? We hear Julia Mossbridge's origin story, and it starts when she's a young child talking about dream interpretation, and she brings that with her for her whole life. We heard that when we listened to Michael P. Masters, and Michael P. Masters had a moment of a flash of an alien when he was a kid, and he directed
his dad did actually. You just remembered hearing his story from his dad. He didn't see it himself until he was much earlier.
Very true. Very true. But he did have some sort of thing that happened in his brain because he said he saw an alien or something. It was reacting to his father, and that sort of steered him on his career path. So what we're seeing is, I think, a lot of people with some real deep inherent bias in these things, entering into these things, wanting to see the thing that they already believe is true. I am not against these studies at all. I just think people need to do way better controls on these things. I would love to know if that's a true or a false thing, but the way she conducts her experiments, I wouldn't trust this person to do this at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm not against these experiments. I've taken part in these experiments. I've done experiments with people who claim that they're psychic, and I've tested them under scientific conditions. And I know how hard it is to put in place the kind of controls that stop accidental information leakage. I can tell a quick story. There was one we did where we were talking to two ladies. We tested them at Goldsmith University in London with Chris French, who I mentioned in the introduction. And we had them sit behind a screen, and they weren't allowed to see who was on the other side of the screen. And they said that wouldn't be a problem. One of them talked to the dead, so they said the spirits could walk around the screen and just tell you everything about them. So when it came to the sitters, we had to we made sure we gathered people who were maybe similar in demographics. We made sure that there was no reflections in the room, that you could get a little glimpse.
Sure.
But we even had to tell the sitters, don't wear any perfume today, because if you're the one person who turns up with an expensive perfume on, the person on the other side of the screen might smell that you're wearing expensive perfume and say, you take a lot of care in your appearance. You worry about what people think about you. You think it's important to be well turned out. They're not writing you're wearing perfume, but everything they're writing is informed by the scent. So you have to work really hard to prevent any accidental information being passed across. And you can only do that by starting from the assumption that we have to just clear everything out. If you work from the assumption that I'm going to prove this right, you're going to end up proving yourself right, not because it's real, but because you weren't good enough to filter out the noise.
Next, she explains the phenomenon, the telepathy train.
The video I want to show you, if you can find it, is one of what we call a telepathy train, where the students, and this happened more than once when we were physically in town in Chicago as a team, where this one student comes in and says something, leaves, and the next student comes in with their mom, and they check in. You know, Maria always asks them, would you like to check in? And then they refer to the thing the last student was talking about. And it happened in a really compelling way in this video, because there was also a discussion that the first student who comes in, which I believe I'm calling participant 4, just for anonymity. So participant 4 comes in and says he wants to go on a double date with participant 5 and his girlfriend. And then he says, tell his mom. And then when participant 5 comes in, he says, tell my mom I want to go on a double date with participant 4 and his girlfriend. So they clearly had already discussed this telepathically, because they're non-speakers. They're not talking to each other. Their parents haven't talked to each other about this. The parents don't know each other. And so that happened. And then they also passed on this, so this stuff kept happening. They also passed on this idea of slamming a beach ball on the ground in order to identify each of the videos, because they wanted to get the telepathy signals right, but they were missing them, on the formal trials. So they discussed between themselves, apparently, telepathically, if you slam a beach ball on the ground before we do the trial, then we'll focus on it in time, and we'll go to the right timeline to talk about this is what they write down to get to the video in our minds. And so that's the video that I wanted to show you, if it's here, because I don't include the double date stuff in it because it's too private and they say too many names of other.
So, yeah, what she's saying here is that the kids said this thing, but they couldn't have possibly talked to each other. But the thing is, they all spelled out exactly the same thing. But they spelled that out to Maria, who was the common factor in the room, who was in each of these conversations. So what she's saying is, well, how could Maria possibly have known what the previous student had said to Maria? It's not that mystifying when you put it that way.
Can you, just in case the audience might have missed the Telepathy Tapes episode, sort of explain what's going on here? Oh, just very briefly about the children who are nonverbal.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that a nonverbal person is communicating in these experiments is by pointing their finger at letters on a letterboard. But that letterboard isn't like on a table where it's static and unmoving and uninfluenced by people. It's being held up by a facilitator. And what actually happens a lot of the time is the facilitator is either moving the board towards the finger without realizing it, or they are giving some other kind of cues. So sometimes parents, because they're expecting the next letter to come, they might be kind of sending visual cues without realizing of an expectation of the finger moving and the finger stopping. And so they will start to spell things out in this way. And it's not just with parents, it's with the facilitators too. So when she's talking about the telepathic autistic children here, what we really mean is their fingers went to certain letters on a board that was held up by a person who was privy to the conversation and knew the answers that they were expecting to get. And at that point, it's more like a Ouija board than a genuine attempt to get communication. The way to take a lot of that kind of bias out would be to stand the board on a plastic plinth and let the person touch it completely unaided with nobody in their field of vision. But when you do that, you find actually, as she even sort of hinted at in the middle of this excerpt here, she said they wanted to get the telepathy signals right, but they were missing them on the formal trials. So what she's explaining here isn't something that happened during the formal trials. It was during the informal stuff where the controls were much more lax and much less restrictive. What she's saying is when you put those restrictive or any kind of restrictive controls in place, the telepathic signals start to miss. It doesn't seem like they're telepathic when there are good controls in place.
Yeah, and I think another way to control this might be to just switch out the person who's holding the board, right? Yeah. So if someone knows the thing that's happening and they have the board, that's bad. But if someone has no idea what the person had said before or any of the things that they're trying to test them on and they don't know, then holding the board doesn't matter because they're not going to be able to spell out the things that could if there's no such thing as telepathy, then they'll just miss all the time. But we're going to find out later on that she has a way around that too. But she has a lot of explanations for these things, and in this case, she's saying her explanation is that these children are talking to each other in this sort of ether, and they're saying bounce a ball, and that will help them sort of hone in on where these signals are coming from, so it'll make it so that they can communicate better via these telepathic pathways.
It's interesting as well, when you explained it there, it just occurred to me, when she's talking about slamming a ball on the ground, we don't know who's doing the ball on the ground, but it's not going to be the kids who are involved in the experiment.
No,
it's going to be one of the
not.
experimenters, which means we're also introducing a source of external influence. Yeah. In that when the beach ball bounces is when we're going to expect something. So this, again, is starting to put your thumb on the scale a little bit.
Yeah. So they start watching the video here, and I did enhance the sound at the very end because one of the people in the video whispers, and it's very important to catch what they say. But basically, they start watching a video that is sort of interspersed with some text tiles, some very simple text tiles that sort of explain what's going on. So if you hear Joe sound like he's reading off these text tiles.
And that's Jeff and me on the right, and that's Maria. Maybe someone else has questions to ask.
I was wondering if it was the best way to present the video so that the timing doesn't become a factor. Like maybe he saw a video at a different time, but how could we make this one stand out so you know that's the one we're talking about?
Yeah, great. That's kind of what I was going to ask. And that's Natalia on the very left.
Put your foot on the floor. Or cross your leg.
And so he's typing something into a keyboard right now?
He's typing into the keyboard.
Counseling.
It's got electronic voice. And the electronic voice is hard to hear, so she'll repeat it, and then I also have a little slide that shows what he said.
What did the voice say?
Slam.
Slam.
Hey. Ball.
Slam a ball?
This is where he's giving us this idea to slam a ball on the ground to get him to the right timeline in telepathy trials. It was his idea. It never occurred to us.
Before that.
That's before.
Picked up the F. I don't know why. before.
Ready.
By the way, Maria has a big crush on you. She knows you're married, but she told me not to tell you.
Tara said thanks.
Video.
Okay. Where or which person would be helpful to do that for the video?
So you can't see this. If you listen to this on the pod, you won't see it. But if you go to the video, you'll actually see we're like at an hour 15. You can see her moving the keyboard around to his finger. And the reason you can't see it as fully as you might is because, unfortunately, Jamie, in setting up the shot with the video in the background and then Joe and Julia, has put Joe's picture over the keyboard, which is the only thing that matters here. It's genuinely frustrating.
The only part that you want to see where this person is interacting with the thing that they're supposedly talking with, and you can't even see it.
Yeah, but it shows, I think, that we know that that's the only part that matters. But very clearly, the keyboard doesn't matter to Jamie and to the people who set up with him, because this is telepathy. And why is the keyboard important? But the movement of the keyboard is what's really, really important here. And she told us earlier, like, they turned off the cameras. And she said when they were transmitting the thing to guests, she said they turned off the cameras, turned off the microphones. We can see here that they don't. They've got her Julia's camera on. So what you'd expect to see is for them to have nothing on the screen while they're transmitting the idea across. So that's not great. And also at the end here, you can see and hear the facilitator whispers no.
Yeah.
So like the facilitator isn't just standing there holding the board and doing nothing. She's moving the board to his finger and she's saying no and giving him verbal cues in the middle of the test, which completely biases the entire test. If this kid is telepathic, this is a terrible test to prove that.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Marsh. And I had missed it in my first listen through. And then I had checked your notes while I was listening in my second listen through. And I heard exactly what you're talking about. And there's a very distinct, at the end of that, a no. She says no.
You can see her mouth, yeah.
Yeah, talking to the person. And I was blown away. I thought exactly what you thought. Like, how could you possibly think this is a scientifically rigorous experiment if someone is literally guiding the child to do something or to not do something in this case? Absolutely terrible. When you watch this video, like Marsh suggests, there's most of the mechanism is just cropped out. There is a tiny bit at the beginning you get to see before they sort of put the pictures over where you can see this person holding the board. And Marsh is correct. That board is moving quite a bit. It's not completely static. That board is moving around and that person is is pointing to it. But one of the things that they do that I think sort of sells it in some ways as if it is more communication is they add to that board a electronic voice, almost like what Stephen Hawking had. So Stephen Hawking, when he wanted to speak, he had to use his cheek to twitch, and his cheek would twitch and it would control the way in which his eye was, what his eye was looking at and things like that. And he would be able to spell things out. And he had like an autocorrect feature on his speech machine. So he would be able to speak because he didn't have the ability to do it.
Yeah.
And it's giving that illusion that we already have an idea of Stephen Hawking, someone who's a brilliant person who does something similar. And so our brain is sort of putting this together and saying, oh, well, this is just like how Stephen Hawking talked. But it's not anything like that at all. This person isn't, if you watch the video, they're just holding their finger out and then the person is sort of moving the board around to collect the letters.
Yeah, exactly. And then even then, we're watching the video of the experiment. And as you pointed out in the introduction to it, we keep cutting away to a transcript of what's being said. Why are we cutting to a transcript of words on a screen when the whole point of this is to illustrate that there was nothing unusual going on, that there was no cueing, there was no controlling, that this is genuine communication? What's the point in videoing it as a scientific experiment if you're going to cut away in the middle of the video to tell us what you think it's proving? This is not how you do this. This is very, very low rigor.
So they continue on, and this is Joe starting to read the transcript of it aloud.
So this
so this is the transcript of it.
Can you
Slam a
pause
ball
here?
before sending. That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Natalia says, who should do that before the video is sent?
He says
He says sender. What kind of ball? Slam a beach ball. Why would you why would that draw your attention to this timeline? He says, because I could see and hear it when looking in the future. Doesn't matter how many times she slams it. He says before each video once.
Yeah.
So the slamming of the ball allowed him to look into the future, is what he was saying?
He was hoping that would work because he had just failed a telepathy trial and he said, I was on a different timeline. And we said, so how can we get you on this timeline? And he said he made up this idea of slamming a beach ball. And what we found fascinating about it was, that's an original idea that none of us thought about. But then we also found it fascinating because of what you'll see next, which is the next person who comes in, who, of course, hadn't heard any of this. This is another participant 5, and Natalia's.
So, yeah, I just do not trust this transcript because this transcript is what they think is said and what they think is important. But this transcript doesn't include, for example, when the facilitator whispers during the test.
Right.
So we're going to miss some stuff that they might not think is important, I would argue is important. And this is where you kind of end up massaging the results, even through the best of intention. There's no intention, I don't think, to deceive. Through your best of intention to try and display this in the most impressive way possible, you accidentally round off all the bits that actually explain what's going on. Even with this beach ball example, the idea of the beach ball came up after he'd been failing some of the tests. So what we're watching isn't a video of the failed test. Why aren't we watching the video of the failed test? We don't even get to see the failed test. The only thing we get to watch is the video of the special pleading as to why it went wrong. And that special pleading, it's an original idea that none of us had thought of before. All ideas are original until you think of them. It doesn't matter who thinks of them. They've come up at this point. And lo and behold, once you've thought of them, they keep coming back up. But show me the test. Don't show me this stuff afterwards.
Great point, Marsh. And I think I want to lay out the scene here. So in the first video that we saw, there was a lady in black who was holding the keyboard. But over on the upper right of the screen is a woman in white with sort of black pattern on her shirt. She's off up onto the right. So Julia is explaining that this child had this idea of slamming the ball. Let's slam a ball, a beach ball can make it so we can find each other in this ether, right? It's like a sounding that allows us to find each other in the ether. So they're going to slam this ball, and that's the idea. And the other person comes in with the same idea. But all they do is they switch out the people who are holding the board, and the person who heard that idea is holding the board for the next person. She wasn't holding the board in the previous experiment, but she's holding it in the next experiment. So that's what we get to hear next. They talk about the test in this next one.
Participant 4 arrives after participant 5 leaves. He has to go on a double date with participant 5 and his girlfriend, something participant 5 asked about participant 4 already. He also brings up something participant 5 mentioned about how to make the telepathy work better. What is that voice?
That's him. He's able to type and do this sort of sing-song talking at the same time.
It would be good to try the beach ball as well.
Now, did you see how Natalia just does that little shrug?
It would be good to try the beach ball slam. So no, he didn't hear that other conversation at all. He wasn't in the room.
His mom.
Where was he?
So he was at home with his mom. So he came in after we had a 20-minute break between the participants.
So he wasn't anywhere near the building. No, there's no way he could have known.
That's why Natalia gave that shrug. Like, see, she and Maria see this all the time, where students will all be talking about the same thing. and
so he just comes in and says the beach ball slam would be a good idea.
Yeah.
So
it's
somehow
as if he was
or another
in that conversation.
Whoa.
Yeah, and it is like they are all in the same conversation.
Yeah, so as you point out, Cecil, like the next person hadn't heard any of it, but Natalia and Maria are in the room and they're facilitating. They know all of this. This isn't remarkable at all. You know, she says it happens all the time. I bet it does. I bet it does happen that when you use the same facilitator or the same handful of facilitators each time, they keep replicating the previous conversation they were in, regardless of who's doing the pointing at the board, because this is evidence to me that the pointing at the board isn't where the information's coming from at all.
Yeah, they're all in the same conversation. It's just the facilitator, not the child who's in the conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So then they talk about the concept that Kai Dickens brought up on the telepathy type episode, the hill, the sort of a metaphysical place where all the nonverbal children meet.
Well, there's that thing that they kept talking about in the telepathy tapes where they all meet
on the
psychically
hill.
On the hill. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I had
they all talk about it independently. Like it's not something that has been taught to them. Like, do you meet on the hill? Oh yeah, I do. No, they've talked about it independently, which is very weird.
Right, and one way, so
odd concept.
Well, I turn on my scientist hat when I think about that, and I think, okay, well, they could have heard it on the telepathy tapes, and then they started talking about it, but that's not how it seemed to have worked.
Yeah, I mean, it's not how it worked, because I listened to the telepathy tapes and I heard Kai Dickens talking on this show. It's just that the facilitators did hear about the hill from other people.
You're right.
And then they said to their kids, hey, do you ever meet on the hill? And their kids go, yes, because their kids aren't saying yes. The person is spelling themselves on the board. They've asked the spelling board at this point. That's how it happened. And somehow Joe has forgotten this, but it's even worse that Julia doesn't seem to know this. Julia's involved in the telepathy tapes. She should know this order of operations. She can put on the scientist hat all she likes, but she only really puts it on when it doesn't involve actually challenging the psi claim in any kind of real meaningful way.
I know that I think there might be a push for some people who might be listening to think, hey, maybe we should let Joe off the hook here. He's not a researcher. He's not somebody who creates these types of things. He doesn't really know how this stuff is done. He's just watching something that might seem convincing to someone who's a layman, someone who's just a regular layman who might not pay attention to this sort of thing, might not know how to rigorously control this type of stuff. And maybe he's convinced by that. But I want to play a tiny clip of Oz Perlman. Now, Oz Perlman is a mentalist. He was on Joe's show, and he warned Joe that the telepathy tapes probably aren't real. And this is a very short clip. They sort of talk about it in sort of waves. He explains it in, I think, a very bad way by saying that it's sort of like by trying to tell Joe about mentalists, and I cut that part out. I just want to play the part where he sort of tells Joe, be wary of that.
They're holding, in many instances, in that form of communication, the person who knows the information is holding the letters. They are moving things around and positioning the letters. If you do a double-blind study where the person does not know the word that they're trying to communicate, I'm not even saying psychic, just don't tell them the word, the person holding it, and only show the word to the person who should be saying it, right?
Right.
If you're the autistic child, show them the words so their eyes see it, and then have them type that word in. And do that for me 9 out of 10 times. And they have not been able to do that.
So he says they have not been able to do that. And then I had to cut the tape because he runs on. It's a run-on sentence. So he starts talking about something else there. But he's saying they've not been able to do that. And he's right. Basically, he's saying, I don't know that I like the way he describes it to Joe, but he definitely describes it in a way I think that's easy enough to understand that it's the facilitator that is the one who's doing this. And so Joe knows that it's the facilitator there needs to be some sort of quality control behind that.
Yeah, and you know what? Julia should know this as well, because as I mentioned, Julia has been involved in tests like the one that was written up by Chris French for the Skeptic magazine at the back end of last year, where they were looking at how to put in controls into place on things like precognitive dreams. And those kind of controls and double-blind tests, Julia should be very familiar with. So the fact that either she hasn't done those tests, or she has, and those aren't the ones that she's showing Joe, both of those speak negatively about her level of rigor and her level of objectivity in trying to figure out whether this is true or not.
Well, and I mean, she even says that some of the tests fail. So maybe some of her actual tests are very rigorous. It just so happens that she's showing Joe the sort of sloppy stuff that proves her point. You know what I mean?
And
like
that's
this
actually,
is all.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting because that is what happened in the precognitive dreams tests, where at the end of it, once they'd reanalyzed all the data, they figured out that there was no statistically significant effect there. But Julia came away very happy with the experiment because there were individual things that happened that she thought were good, strong evidence that there was a psychic thing going on, even though those things were happening kind of outside of the controlled elements of the test.
Yeah. She continues on talking about nonverbal speakers and animals.
Yeah.
Reminds me also of something I've noticed in the non-speakers where they're not very good at labeling animals. Like camels and kangaroos might be the same. You know, it's like the physical form
is not what's important.
It's just not what's important. It's like the feeling on the inside. It's to me, it's like proof of a soul or something. I really think we ought to start studying souls scientifically, because if we can show that, and I didn't think we were going to talk about this, but well, I'm sure that happens a lot. But but if we could start understanding what a soul is,
right? How would you quantify it?
Yeah, I don't know. Right? I mean, I think
maybe it's one of those things you just can't.
Maybe
you can't study.
Okay, so because these kids are inexact in their psychic ability when it comes to naming specific animals in a rigorous test, that isn't a test showing that they're not psychic and that all of this is just cognitive bias and wishful thinking. No, it's proof that animals have souls and that these psychic kids are just seeing the animals' souls. That's what's happening here. She's introducing an unfalsifiable thing for which there is no evidence in order to explain why she didn't get good evidence of another thing. This is just special pleading. It's nothing more than that.
Yeah, or kangaroos and camels have the same soul. It could be that also. We don't know. We didn't do a rigorous test of this. I think one of the things that popped into my head when she said this is maybe the kids there was a couple of pictures on something and they kept getting it wrong, right? So like instead of spelling something out, they were pointing to something that they were said, point to the kangaroo or something, and they were pointing to a camel. And she's trying to explain that away. She's trying to explain those types of things away. And I feel like, just like you say, it's special pleading. It's you. What it is it's you introducing your bias to say, this has to be real, so let's find a way for it to be real. And this is a great explanation for that. Not that stuff just doesn't exist. Okay, so she tells a story of how they prepared to record sort of her version of the telepathy tapes or the telepathy tapes themselves. It's not really clear.
And we were also talking before about ego, and I think that's a part of the problem with the way people can create or not create, is that you got to learn how to get out of your own way. And everybody talks about that. Writers always talk about that. Like, you have to just get out of your own way. Yeah. And that's really what's going on with this wrestling match with the mind.
Yes.
It's like we're trying to just be clear and I think that's where probably some of this nonverbal, these non-speaking people, that's where they have this advantage.
Yes.
They don't have the same perception of themselves the way we do, I bet.
Not at all.
Or so they're free in that regard, that they don't have that monkey on their back.
But then they have another monkey on their back, which is they live in this culture in which people think they're idiots because we read each other's bodies and we say there's something wrong with the way you're moving your body. You can't talk. You're making these sounds. And so you're free in your mind, but you're not free in your body.
And we're giving off negativity. Oh, what's wrong with this guy? And then they
hear
that.
It. Right. And so when we were filming for Kai's documentary, we all got together with the sound people and the camera people before our first non-speaker came in for their trial. And we said, they're telepathic. So we're going to do a little prayer right now that we can all be in a proper positive state when they come in. And our first student came in and said, it was really great walking through the hall and feeling that good. And not like we told him we did that, but it was just validation that was there.
Yeah. So Joe was talking about ego and Julia's talking about ego and saying, what if these kids are just free of ego? And they are free of ego in they're not burdened by their own sense of who they are. They're burdened by your sense of who they are. That is the burden. Right. You are the monkey on their backs here, if there's any monkey on their back. Even this idea that they told this kind of telepathic prayer in the film ahead of their experiments, like she said they said a prayer in order to put them in the right space, put themselves in the right space. And then they essentially told themselves via a spelling board that what they'd done was exactly the right thing.
Yeah.
That's what we're finding out here. This is just such a pure expression of how the ego of the experimenters ran this experiment, and it completely blinded them to what was actually happening. This isn't science at all. Like science, it requires you to set aside your desire for what you want to be true. You know, I'm really invested in this being true. You've got to set that aside so you can find out what actually is true, even if what you find isn't what you'd like to be the case. If you find things that you wouldn't like. She went into these experiments, and so did Kai Dickens and the team, telling everyone involved that these kids are telepathic, and somehow she discovered that, she was completely right after all. Who'd have thought it?
Yeah, that's a great point, Marsh. I mean, every scientist out there has a hypothesis, the hypothesis that they're working on. They are invested in that being right. They thought of it. They want it to be right. They want to discover something new. They had reasons to believe that it was true. And then they put all that aside when they do the testing because not every hypothesis pans out. Not everything they think pans out at the end. And so you've got to be able to put that stuff aside, and it doesn't feel like she's able to put that stuff aside. And I think, like, I'm not going to say what her motives are. I don't know what her motives are. The impression I get from her is that she really wants the best for these kids. She really wants to have this sort of thing be true. And I think those things work in conjunction there. But in reality, I don't think this is the best for the kids because, like you suggest, this is essentially exploiting them to get your result.
Yeah, exactly. It's something that Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, said, the first principle of science is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool because, you know, if you believe in something, you want something to be the case, you are going to find evidence for that more easily than if somebody was coming in objectively. So you've got to try to be objective, and she's failed at that, unfortunately.
We're going to move on to our toolbox section.
Maybe it's a thing that one day human beings will have as in our natural toolbox.
So for the toolbox section this time, we're doing forgetting the misses and maybe a little bit of Texas sharpshooter in there. What's forgetting the misses, Marsh?
Yeah, we've heard a couple of examples already, even in the main section. This conversation is just replete with illustrations of this principle that it's very easy for you to discover something if you're in control of what counts as a discovery and when you're discovering it. You know, in the experiments where you're testing to see if somebody's psychic, you can definitely find that they're psychic if you get to throw out all the times that they fail the experiments. Yeah. You know, we aren't showing Joe Rogan the videos of the kid failing the experiment. We're showing the videos that she finds remarkable. And now, lo and behold, Joe finds this whole thing remarkable. Yeah. So forgetting the misses is the way of massaging the data, whether it's intentional or it can be done entirely accidentally. You remember the thing that's remarkable, you're going to forget the unremarkable thing. As you said earlier, you remember the time that you had a premonition that the plane was going to crash and you got off. You don't remember the time that you had a premonition and the plane didn't crash. You don't remember those things. They're not remarkable at that point.
Okay, so this is, maybe about 45 minutes into the program, she starts telling Joe about a dream that she had.
I'm really fascinated by the remote viewing, and I want to get to that. But I want to start with, like, how did you begin studying this stuff? So you're involved in neuroscience. You're trying to pick which lane you're going to really pursue all your interests in. How did you get involved in this idea of premonition and psychic ability, and that there's a real something there?
Yeah, I sort of hid it from I hid my agenda from myself. So
really?
I discovered, later in life. Yeah, because when I was a kid, my first precognitive dream that I remember was when I was 7. And it was very clear. I dreamt that my friend, I knew which friend, Ishane, what would happen? She would lose her watch. Where would it happen? On the playground. And then the next day that happened. It was very specific. It wasn't like you don't have to be metaphorical about it. What does it mean? It meant that Ishane lost her watch on the playground the next day.
Right.
And so...
Did you tell your parents?
Yeah. And they said, my mom, so my very eccentric family would always talk about dreams at the breakfast table My mom is a therapist and a learning disability specialist. My dad was a physicist. My sister's an artist. And we would all talk about dreams. And so I mentioned this, and my dad, the physicist, says, well, that's a coincidence. And my mom, the therapist, says, you should get a dream journal and write them down. And so I did that.
So yeah, this is the origin story. It's kind of part one of her origin story. We'll hear a few kind of clips in a row. And bear in mind, during the course of this interview, we actually found out that she said she's a year younger than Joe. And so she said this took place when she was 7. So we're talking about an event 50 years ago that she remembers this dream that she felt was precognitive. And she's been working in this field a lot of her life. So this, I imagine, is not the first time she's told this story. And that's a problem because the more that you tell a story, especially a story that you think is incredibly important and foundational to who you are, the more what you're doing is actually remembering the last time you told that story and the details of the story to try to essentially get rounded off accidentally over time. But also, we don't actually know if this was the first time or even the only time she had a dream that she thought might be precognitive in nature. All we know is that she saved this in her mind as the first one. If there was a dream before that where she felt like her friend was going to do something and the next day they didn't, she wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have counted as her first precognitive dream. And so we kind of end up forgetting any misses along the way. Those aren't remarkable. Those aren't going to be part of my origin story or my foundational narrative. And it's like if you only ever made a note of the first time you ever won a raffle or the only time you've ever won a raffle and you ignored all the times you entered a raffle and didn't win, you're going to make it look like you're really good at winning raffles when it's still just chance.
Also, let's presume that this is actually real, that we get a lot of trash dreams where we're walking around, we're wearing roast beef as shoes, and we're naked at Costco or whatever. But once in a while, you'll have a precognitive dream. Well, what use is that? We can only tell it's precognitive post-cognitively, right? So that's great. In retrospect, I have 100,000 dreams in my dream book, and 2 of them came true that I couldn't do anything about because I would have to be acting on every dream. I would have to be aware that there might be roast beef on the ground that I could accidentally step in or something, right? Because we have all kinds of crazy, useless trash dreams. And maybe what she's trying to say is we're trying to minimize the trash dreams and only look at the future prescient dreams. And that's fine, but it definitely requires a lot more work than just looking at the coincidences after they happen.
Yeah, and that is exactly what her mum is suggesting. Keep a dream journal. Great. So you're going to have a big, long list of all the dreams you remember. And afterwards, you're going to go back through them to see which ones you can find that you can, explain, try and fit in to make it seem like they came true.
So this is the continuation. We're not skipping any tape. They're just talking more about that dream.
And
your dad just dismissed it as a coincidence?
He has come around.
That's a very specific coincidence.
It's three factors. And I always like to say, if you have 2 or more factors, it's likely precognitive.
But just the one. Lost the watch. And then she loses her watch.
But she did just get her watch. We were 7 years old. She got her watch from her father. You could predict that as someone who's good at figuring out what kids do is that they might lose the watch, right? So that could be a coincidence. You have to think about all the possible things that could happen to a 7-year-old in the watch that they just got. Losing it is up there.
Yeah, but you thought about it the day before she lost it.
I dreamt it the day before she lost it. Yeah. So he did dismiss it as a coincidence, but we also had ball lightning and weird orbs in our house, and he also dismissed that as not actually having happened.
So I'm not sure what she means. She says there's 3 factors. I wish she'd been more specific or come back to what she meant exactly by the 3 factors here.
So I have an idea what she means by 3 factors. I don't know if it's true. It's just an idea. She mentions her friend, she mentions a playground, and she mentions a watch. And I think those 3 things that she very specifically sort of calls out, she's saying that since it has 3 factors, her friend, watch, and playground, then therefore it's something that is significant, statistically significant. That's what I think. I don't know if that's true.
I think you could be onto something. I think that would make sense. Or it might also be the time, the fact that it was the next day. So it could be 3 from those.
Yeah, one of those is a 4 factor, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but if she's talking, if that's true, she says it only needs 2 factors. Okay, so if it's, let's say it is friend, playground, and watch. If it was friend and playground, would that be precognitive that she was going to go to school and see her friend from school in the playground outside of the school?
Yeah. Or see her friend's new watch. Yeah, right? If it's just two,
Like her friend might have mentioned she's getting a new watch. Like you don't know, like in these kind of things. If it was the day, so there isn't three factors in here. It's one factor. A kid lost a watch.
Yeah.
That's it. That's not
right.
that
You're 100%
impressive.
right. Yeah.
Like Joe is saying only one factor is enough, which is lost watch. That's hugely uncontrolled. That's wildly uncontrolled. Don't put Joe in
charge of this stuff.
Yeah. If it was just a lost watch, then it could be anybody in her life loses a watch at some point.
Yeah.
Like that's nothing. This is too uncontrolled. I had a dream the other night that my friend Alice from Skeptics with a K would dye her hair a light purple. I genuinely had this dream. She hasn't dyed her hair a light purple. But if she does at any point now, does that mean I've dreamt the future? Well, no, I'm more likely to dream of Alice than I am of someone I don't see very often in my day-to-day life. I see Alice quite often. She lives around the corner from me. We work together quite often. So she's going to appear in my dreams more often than somebody I haven't seen for 20 years. Alice already has dyed hair. She dyes her hair orange, so she's already someone likely to dye their hair. So it's just a color difference at some point in the future that I could carry that off. Like that's what's happening here. She sees her friend because she's her friend. She sees her at the playground because that's where she sees her. At this point, all the remarkable stuff in this just go away.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in this next bit, this is where at the end of the last clip, she says something like, we had ball lightning orbs in our house. And this is her telling Joe about the ball lightning orbs.
Wait, you had ball lightning in your house?
Yeah, we were in this old farmhouse in Libertyville, Illinois, where I grew up. And we lived with my grandparents there. And ball lightning came inside the house, and my mother stood up for it. My mother said, Ed, my dad's name, didn't you see that lightning zipping around the house last night? Lightning. And my dad said, that couldn't have happened.
Did he see it?
Of course he saw it.
But he just wanted to.
But he didn't have an explanation for it.
What does your dad do?
He was a theoretical physicist. For his dissertation, he was at University of Chicago. He discovered or showed somehow the electron layer on the moon, that there's this like atmosphere of electrons on the moon. And
how can he say that couldn't happen?
So one of the reasons, so people are so complex with the reasons they go into particular fields. My experience with physicists, my dad included, is they tend to go into this field of physics because the whole job of physics is to simplify everything into a few equations, right? And many, many, many physicists have OCD and have control issues. My dad had severe OCD. And so in his mind, it couldn't have happened because all his circuits would fry because he didn't know how to explain it. And my mother just stood up for it and said, well, it did happen and you saw it and I saw it. And it hit the edge of my room and then went out, and there was still like the brown mark where it was burned in the corner of the room. So like we had plenty of evidence. So there was stuff going on, and there was this push-pull with my mom, who just believed in the primacy, I guess, or the importance of experience. Like we saw it. And the pull from my dad, who believed in, if you didn't understand, if you didn't have a theory for something, it couldn't exist. And so I was living in that.
So I think this is a really great example of the space that she came from. Because the thing about ball lightning is it probably doesn't exist. There's not a lot of good evidence that ball lightning actually exists as the thing that people think of when you say ball lightning. When you look at the reports of ball lightning, there's some people think it means like a very large thing that floats outdoors during a storm, sometimes in front of you, sometimes very high up in the sky. Others think it's like this big plasma ball in the sky. Others think it's really tiny. Some people think it's something that can appear indoors or even float through a wall into your house. That's clearly what she's sort of talking about here. Some think it happened, some think it's over in just a flash, the same way as normal lightning. Other people think it can last for a period of minutes and float around an awful lot. And my co-host, Mike Hall, actually covered this in depth on an episode of Skeptics with a K, my other podcast. It was episode 460. He talked about all these different reports into ball lightning. And what we find is there's actually relatively little in common between one report and another, but it all just gets lumped together into the same thing that the same term, the same phrase people get familiar with. Same way that UFO now means weird thing in the sky, even if there's almost nothing in common between your weird thing and my weird thing. We both saw a UFO. But when people talk about ball lightning, they're just using the same cultural term for a wide range of disparate things, many of which they're just better explanations, including where you were mistaken about what you saw. Now, her way to address all of this is to assume that her dad was only dismissing it because of his OCD and because he just couldn't handle it being true, rather than, for example, there's not a great deal of evidence that it's real, and there's probably a better explanation for it if we just kind of investigate a bit further, while her mum just accepted it on face value. And therefore, her mum's story of it, when she talks about her mum in this, she doesn't attach any negative adjectives or descriptions in the telling of the story. With the dad, it was all about control issues and OCD. With her mum, well, she accepted it, so it's all fine. And from her telling the story, I'm not even that clear that her dad actually witnessed it. We've got a mum saying she saw it, and her mum saying to the dad, you must have seen it too. But I don't think we actually hear her say that her dad did see it.
Yeah.
At which point we're taking away, if we're talking about 3 factors, we're lowering the number of factors of people who witnessed this thing 50 years ago that she's now retelling to Joe as a pivotal moment.
She even says it leaves like a ectoplasm patch on the wall, like Slimer and Ghostbusters. So there'd be something there for her father to see if that was the case, if it really did happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. I will point out, when we talked about ball lightning on Skeptics with a K, I did wonder if it's a synonym for a... Hang on. When we talk about ball lightning on Skeptics with a K, I did wonder if it's a synonym for a vasectomy. I wish I hadn't totally whiffed that punchline. Fuck me.
I was thinking about it's like something you put over when you're tanning. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that you just lay a little cloth over the nethers to make sure they don't tan as dark. It's ball lightning instead. So
I'd written all the parts of that joke apart from the word vasectomy because I assumed I had the word vasectomy in my head. And when it got to the punchline, I did not have it there in my head. It just was not loaded in the barrel.
Like a vasectomy. All right. Now we're going to move on to the next clip. This is where they're talking about the autistic children. Joe asks her if any of those nonverbal autistic kids ever wrote something down where they couldn't possibly have known it. And then she gives this particular example.
We were preparing for the formal trials that would be filmed for the documentary. And so we were doing that on Zoom. We weren't yet in person. But the non-speaker that I'm about to tell you about was with his communication partner, Maria Welch, who's a speech and language pathologist. And he was, getting ready to do the trial. We were explaining it to him. And I was in Virginia. Maria and the student were in Illinois. And then Jeff Tarrant, another co-investigator, another neuroscientist, was in Oregon. And so the person who was going to send the video, in other words, just intend to send the video like in a telepathy experiment, was going to be Jeff. The non-speaker chose Jeff. And then we did it. We turned off our cameras. We were on Zoom. We turned off our cameras. We turned off our microphones. Jeff sent the video. Maria and the student started, intending to receive it. And then the student said he was ready. He spelled that he was ready. And then Maria asked the question that I thought I had put in the Zoom chat for her because we didn't have our software set up. So I had to send her a question in the Zoom chat. And the way we traditionally did it at that time was I asked multiple choice. Is it a this, or this? But the thing is, by mistake, I sent that to Jeff because I had a private chat with him going. So I didn't realize that she didn't have the questions. Meanwhile, the student starts to spell on the letterboard. He says, I'm ready. He says, it's a beautiful sky. And she had not seen the questions. It was a beautiful sky. Of all the videos in the world that he picked to describe that way, it was a video of the tops of trees and then above them, like northern lights that had been colored like by an artist to look even more cool. And then there's like a time lapse. And he said, it's art of a beautiful sky. And that was a really great description. And statistically, there's almost no way to calculate how statistically likely that is because it could have been any video in the world. And we didn't even give him the multiple choice.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So this sounds like a really interesting story as long as this is exactly how it happened. And as long as there are no other times that they were given a cue and got it wrong, because omitting those failures, those misses, is going to bias our interpretation of what's going on here. And completely by random chance, as I'm recording this right now, I've got my Windows desktop just cycles through random backgrounds. The background right now could only be described as beautiful sky. It's not the Northern Lights, but it very clearly, like literally genuinely is. I think it might even be Chicago. Chicago. I'm not quite sure, but it's like a random beautiful skyline kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to go to vivid pictures, you're going to quite often come to beautiful skies. Oh, it's chilly, apparently. So there we go. So yeah, this is just a story that she's telling. This isn't science. This isn't a scientific experiment. It might be a good starting point, an indication of what might be worth scientifically investigating to see if there's something there or not. But according to her, she's done the scientific investigation. So why is she telling us about this story and not about the results of her rigorous and well-controlled testing? Why isn't she's showing transcripts of things that conversations took place? Why isn't she showing graphs and tables of statistics of how often something was right and how often something was wrong? That's what science looks like. We don't have any indication in this story about exactly who knew what or who was present where, or what time period was involved between them starting the experiment and getting this answer. She says that Maria asked the question of the student, but then she said she hadn't sent Maria the question. She sent it to Jeff. So how did Maria know the question? Was she psychic too?
It's a great question. That's a great question.
I just don't want to hear what one kid did one time. I want to hear the outcome of 20 or 30 or 50 such tests.
Yeah.
That's what we should be talking about here. And the other thing that's just worth pointing out as to what it says about the experimentation generally is, in this story, what she's telling us is she fucked up part of the experiment.
Yep.
You know, they sent the priming to the wrong place. So even if we take this story at face value, it's a story about their methodological failure, their inability to follow the method. So this tells us that the science wasn't done as carefully as it should have been because she's fucked up here.
Yeah.
This is one of the trials that should have been omitted. They should have been completely omitted because they didn't follow the protocol. Did they omit this from their results? I don't know.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting when you mention all the graphs and things. She does mention 2 papers in this. And I did look at the papers that she mentions where there's sort of a statistical chance that some of this stuff is happening. And they use very, very loose language in those studies too, by the way. They say maybe. Nobody's saying it's a thing. The way she's using very forceful language here to say it's happening. But those whole things are just statistical graphs. They're just graphs of like bars with circles in them, and here's the line, and here's these, a bunch of little curved lines and how they match up with each other. It's all that very, very deliberate, but also very descriptive graphs about what is happening with these types of things. And you don't see any of that. What you see is a slide, and then she tells a story, like you suggest, of how she messed this up. The other thing, too, is I'm not saying this is cold reading, but really what she's describing is partially sky. She says there's treetops. She says it's a time lapse. She says there's a whole bunch of other things, but the person only describes the sky. Well, that's not the whole thing. That's just one part of the thing. And that's a throw out that could be something. And we've already heard her say that they've statistically missed before. So even if it's not a big deal to throw something like this out beforehand, because it's an easy hit. I mean, like you suggest, lots of photos and lots of videos might have a sky in them. Well, if it's outdoors at all, there's probably a sky. And so it's kind of one of those things that, like, it's not a bad thing if they throw this thing out. I'm not saying that they're doing it on purpose. I'm not making that claim. No. But I am saying that it's really easy for somebody who's interpreting this data, if it's not controlled, to make that assumption. Now, this is a dream she had, and one of the nonverbal students sort of tell her about the dream that she had.
Right. But I have my own experience of that particular student. I forget whether I called him participant 4 or participant 5 at the end. He and I became, I had a good understanding of his mind, and we had some good conversations. And I had a dream one night where he came to me, and all he did was show me this, like, it was like a sun where you could see the sunspots, and it was just slowly turning, and it was beautiful. And he just gave it to me. And then the next day I was working with him over Zoom. And so I asked Maria, I said, can I ask him a question? And she said, sure. And I said, last night you gave me something. You gave me a shape. What was the shape? Because I hadn't told Maria about the dream or anyone else. It was just my dream that I wrote in my journal. And I was thinking he would say ball or sphere, and that would either be a good guess or it would be telepathy. But he goes, I still can't get over this. I sent you a pre-revolutionary orb with 4 stars on it, slowly rotating.
What is a pre-revolutionary
I don't fucking know,
orb?
but
What does that mean?
I don't know. I mean,
With 4 stars on it?
with 4 stars on it, slowly rotating.
But that's not exactly what you saw in the dream.
Well, there were these sunspots. So there's a poetic license that they have. I would say that's 80% correct. So it was slowly rotating, and there were these sunspots that I was calling sunspots. He was calling stars, and it was definitely an orb. What does pre-revolutionary mean? I don't know. They talk about, and I talk about in my book, The Love Revolution, this idea that we're moving towards a time when we can actually use love in our lives to communicate and to connect people. But maybe that's what he means.
Okay, so she dreamt of a ball, and because of that, she asked the facilitator a primed question and got something that wasn't the same thing that she saw, that she decided was actually an 80% win anyway. Yeah. And it's not that impressive. Like, listeners, quickly think of a shape. Okay, you're thinking of a sphere. Like, most of you will be thinking of a sphere. We're fairly simple creatures. There's only certain numbers of shapes that we can think of in any kind of moment.
I'm not going to think of a non-Euclidean shape.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a nonagon or something.
Yeah.
But what if instead of doing that primed question of what did you give me, what shape did you give me, what if instead of that she'd ask something more open, like, did anything happen last night you want to tell us about?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that was, yeah, I came to you in a dream and gave you a pre-revolutionary orb, all right, that might be more interesting at that point.
Yeah, for sure. But this is like the sky earlier was a hit, right? Because 80% is 100%. And even Joe stops her and says, what does that even mean? He sounds dubious.
Yeah, exactly. And, she explains, well, he meant this, but it was poetic license. You know what has absolutely no place in scientific experiments? Poetic license. There should be no poetic license in a scientific experiment.
Yeah, that is a huge tell. When she says that we give them sort of wiggle room. That's not science anymore. Now this is another student reading her mind in this next Toolbox clip.
And then this other non-speaker who worked with Natalia, who was the young woman you saw on the left, who also works with a lot of spellers, just decided to start reading my mind. Like we did. I asked Natalia, I said, can we just do an experiment where I'll be doing something and I'll know what I'm doing at that time. And you just ask one of your students to read my mind. And then no one else will know what I'm doing. She won't know what I'm doing. And so what I was doing this remote viewing for a friend. And so I knew exactly what I was doing during that time and what I was thinking. But what I was thinking about was, remember that comet 3I Atlas?
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of obsessively thinking about 3I Atlas. Like, what is it? What's the deal? It was during that exact time in December last year. And he comes back with some stuff I don't understand, like poetic license. I call it poetic license, or just it's wrong, that I don't understand where it came from. And then he says, and 3I Atlas. And he talks about this owl that I saw in a video when I was doing the remote viewing. And I was like, so Natalia didn't even know what 3I Atlas was. She had to look it up. And the parent didn't know what 3I Atlas was. And he spelled it 3EYE Atlas, right?
Wow.
So it was phonetic. Yeah. And then later, a couple weeks ago, I get a text from Natalia that the same student, who apparently has now felt perfectly fine reading my mind, tapped into my mind when I was thinking about a medication that my stepmom was taking. And he used her name, which Natalia didn't know, and told me that she would be okay on the medication, that it would help her. And then told Natalia to text me, and so she did.
The 3I Atlas, in writing it as EYE is very strange.
Well, and
that's hard. That's because that's not how it's written anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
So the fact that he wrote it IEYE means he was hearing you.
It's how you would hear it.
What the hell?
Yeah.
How weird.
So there's no way I can explain. Oh, also he came up with my son's name, which Natalia didn't know. So that could have been from her, but still he read her mind.
Okay, so he said a load of things that you didn't understand, you said here, so they weren't relevant, and therefore you drop them and you're not talking about them here.
Yeah.
This is forgetting the misses. This is cherry picking. You're not telling us all of the data. You're just picking out the data you think that matters. And on this, Natalia is the facilitator. None of this is coming from the child. It's coming from Natalia. that she even admits this. She says, and then they said my son's name, which Natalia did know. So maybe it came from her. Maybe it all came from her. Maybe she didn't know, I'm not sure about the name thing, but like, did you talk to Natalia about your mum at any point? Did she know your mum was going on medication? The kid didn't know that, but that doesn't mean that you didn't mention it to your colleague at some point. If you ever talked about your mum. Maybe you talked about the fact that you were obsessed about the three-eye atlas at the time. Maybe Natalia didn't know what that was, but maybe she knew that you were obsessed if you were so obsessed about it. All of these things can leak in, but you're discounting them all because you're assuming that you only need to keep that information from the child and not from Natalia. Once you remove the notion that this is mind reading, you're left with, one of my friends knew some of the things that I'd been talking with her about recently and was able to then spell that on a letterboard.
Yeah. And in the way she makes it seem like the I in Atlas, instead of the letter I, it was spelled out EYE, right? But if you mention that, or if this person saw it in the news and doesn't know what it is, they might spell out I as well, because you wouldn't know. If it's 3I, third eye, whatever, Atlas, you wouldn't know what that means, but you might spell it out. And you look, it's exactly what you said. She throws out all this other stuff that the person said. Oh, they said all this other stuff, but that wasn't right. But this one was right. That is terrible. That's absolutely awful. But again, Joe doesn't pay attention to any of that stuff. He doesn't dig down on any of the stuff that was wrong. What he says is, whoa. And he's like, Natalia, he's like, wow, the kid wrote it out. And it's like, no, Natalia wrote it out, not the kid. Natalia's holding the board. She's the one who's moving it around. She's the one who knows, Joe.
Yeah. And you know what's missing from the retelling of this story? Any documentation. We've seen that she was filming some of the readings. She's either not showing us the film or the notes that were taken contemporaneously at the time, or she didn't take the notes and film it at the time, in which case this is not a scientific experiment. It's not useful. Give us something that's documentable. Otherwise, what you're doing is just giving us an anecdote.
Yeah. All right. This is the last clip in the Toolbox section. This is more things that the telepathic child had told her.
Did you ask him more about this pre-revolutionary orb with 4 stars? Did you, why did you give me that? What does that mean?
I wish I did. One thing I know with this particular participant is that he's so gifted, and his family asks him a lot, about to do mediumship stuff, like, what does Grandpa think about this or whatever? And in fact,
Grandpa's dead.
Yeah. And to him, there's not a lot of difference. And so, yeah. And they also, the grandmother had a lung transplant, and they asked who the donor was, and he identified a probable donor who lived in the area who had died that day. And they won't know for a year if it was the actual donor, because it takes time to learn who the donor is, but they're pretty sure that it probably is. But so...
Boy, if it turns out that he's right, and you can't find out for another year...
Yeah.
Or they won't release the information.
Well, my husband had a double lung transplant. It just takes a while. Everyone has to agree that they want to release the information. But in any case, he's just really good at this. He's very skilled. And I didn't want him to feel like he was a show pony. And I wanted to get on with his lesson. And so I didn't want to ask other questions. I feel like, he'll probably just show up in my dream and tell me at some point.
Well, that's good enough for a scientist, I guess.
I guess so.
She didn't follow up on any of the details that felt unusual or that she struggled to make fit. She just accepted it as proof. And her reasoning was she didn't want to make him feel like a show pony. Didn't make this kid out to be a show pony, while she's now talking about how magic this child is on the world's biggest podcast. There's a lack of consistency here. Meanwhile, she's just happy to accept he can talk to the dead as well. So we have now mediumship just accepted as if it's true. And I think that's an important thing that we need to bear in mind as part of her worldview.
Yeah.
And she's also accepting that he can identify organ donors, just like he did with this lung donor. And in a year, we'll find out if he's right or not. But until then, as a scientist, the responsible thing to do is to tell millions of people that he is. Yeah. That's the most important thing to do here.
Let's wrap it up with that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you very much. You're a beautiful person.
All right, Marsh. What'd you think of Julia Mossbridge?
Honestly, I think she seemed nice. I think she seemed genuine. I don't think she's trying to deceive anyone. I don't think she's trying to pull the wool over any eyes or to manipulate anyone, but I think she's wrong. I think the level, the standard of evidence she requires to believe in something absolutely supernaturally extraordinary is too high. Is way too low. And the reason it's too low is because she's so invested in this idea that there is consciousness out there that we can tap into, and mediumship's real, and ball lightning's real, and dreams are precognitive. She's invested in all of that, and I think unfortunately it removes her ability to be objective and to therefore test whether any of it's true.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's nice to have Joe talk to a woman that doesn't sound like a pick-me anti-feminist, I guess. But at this point, she seems to me like she really, really wants this to be true. So she's massaging everything she can to make it true. What occurred to me when I was listening to this, and I can't speak for anybody else, but if like my wife were in a horrible accident, let's say, and she became nonverbal or something, and someone were moving something around, and I found out that they were lying to me, that she wasn't speaking to me, but it was the person who was speaking to me for them, I'd be furious. I would be so mad about wanting to have a connection with this person, and it's being interfered with. What, for me, the most important thing would be to know if this is true. That would be the most important thing to me. But I think that I can't put myself in the position of those families, and maybe there's a different mechanism that they're going on. Maybe they just really want it to be true. But if I was part of that, there's a big part of me that says I would definitely want to know that this is the real effect that's happening. And I'm just not talking to the person who's holding the board. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, absolutely true. Well, that's it for the show this week. Remember that you can access more than a half an hour of bonus content every single week from as little as $1 an episode by subscribing at patreon.com/NoRogan. Patrons at a different tier can also get our monthly bonus shows as well. There'll be one of those coming out very soon for May. So keep an eye out for those. We've also got a load going back. So if you are interested in hearing more, you can up a tier and get access to more of the bonus shows there. Meanwhile, you can hear more from Cecil at Cognitive Dissonance and Citation Needed. And you can hear more from me at Skeptics with a K and the Skeptic podcast. And we will be back next week for a little more of the No Rogan experience.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron or check out the show notes, go to norogan.com. KNOWROGAN.com.